At 0230 on October 26th, 1942, Platoon Sergeant Mitchell Paige crouched behind a 30-caliber water-cooled Browning machine gun on a ridge overlooking the Lunga River. Henderson Field lay 2 miles behind him. The jungle pressed against his position from 3 sides. Rain had fallen for 6 hours. The mud was ankle-deep. The temperature was 89 degrees, with 95% humidity. Paige was 24 years old. He commanded 33 men of the machine gun section, 2nd Battalion, 7th Marine Regiment, 1st Marine Division. He had enlisted in 1936. 6 years of service. 2 months on Guadalcanal. He weighed 145 pounds. He stood 5 feet 9 inches tall. He had grown up in Charleroi, Pennsylvania, a coal mining town on the Monongahela River, 25 miles south of Pittsburgh. His father had worked in the steel mills. His mother had died when he was young. He had quit school at 14 to help support his family. The ridge had no name. The Marines called it simply the Ridge, or sometimes Bloody Ridge or Edson's Ridge, after the September fighting. But this was a different ridge, a different night, a different battle. This ridge ran east to west along the southern perimeter of the Henderson Field defenses. The jungle grew thick on the slopes. Kunai grass stood 7 feet tall in the valleys. Visibility at night was measured in feet, not yards. Henderson Field was the reason for everything. The airfield was the only Allied air base in the Solomon Islands. From Henderson Field, American aircraft could interdict Japanese shipping lanes to Australia. They could protect the supply routes that kept Australia in the war. They could threaten Japanese positions throughout the South Pacific. The Japanese understood this. They had built the airfield themselves before the Marines landed on August 7th. Now they wanted it back. Imperial Japanese Army Lieutenant General Harukichi Hyakutake commanded the 17th Army on Guadalcanal. He had 20,000 troops on the island. He had been reinforced throughout September and October. The Tokyo Express Japanese destroyers running troops down the slot from Rabaul had delivered thousands of soldiers despite American air attacks. Hyakutake had planned a coordinated assault. His forces would attack from 3 directions simultaneously. The main effort would come from the south, directly through Paige's position. The Japanese 2nd Infantry Division, the Sendai Division, would lead the assault. They were veterans of the China campaign. Professional soldiers. They had fought at Shanghai, at Nanking, at Wuhan. They had never been defeated. Their commanding officer, Lieutenant General Masao Maruyama, had promised Emperor Hirohito that Henderson Field would fall by October 25th. The date had already passed. Maruyama had miscalculated the difficulty of moving his division through the jungle. His troops had spent 5 days hacking through rainforest, crossing rivers, climbing ridges. They had arrived at their attack positions exhausted, hungry, their supplies depleted. But they had arrived. Paige did not know the size of the force moving toward him. Intelligence had reported Japanese activity south of the perimeter. Patrols had found evidence of enemy movement. The Marines knew an attack was coming. They did not know when. They did not know where. They did not know how many. The 7th Marine Regiment had arrived on Guadalcanal on September 18th. They had been stationed in Samoa before the landing. Fresh troops to replace the exhausted men of the 1st and 5th Marines who had been fighting since August. Paige's battalion had taken over this section of the perimeter on October 24th. 2 days to dig in. 2 days to sight the machine guns. 2 days to learn the terrain. Not enough time. Paige had positioned his guns in a line along the military crest of the ridge. Military crest meant slightly below the actual top of the ridge. From the military crest, the guns had clear fields of fire down the forward slope while remaining protected from direct fire from below. The guns were spaced 50 yards apart. Each gun had a crew of 4, gunner, assistant gunner, 2 ammunition bearers, 33 men total including Paige. They had 8 water-cooled Browning M1917A1 machine guns. Each gun could fire 450 rounds per minute. They had stockpiled 10,000 rounds of .30 caliber ammunition in boxes behind each position. They had dug the guns into fighting positions reinforced with sandbags and logs. They had cleared lanes of fire through the kunai grass. They had done everything right. The problem was the length of the line. Paige's section was responsible for 200 yards of front, 200 yards with 33 men and 8 guns. Standard defensive doctrine called for 1 machine gun per 50 yards of front in the main line of resistance. Paige had 1 gun per 25 yards. It should have been adequate. But there was no reserve, no depth, no second line. If the Japanese broke through anywhere, they would be in the rear of the entire position. And the jungle was so thick that the Marines could not see more than 30 yards in any direction during daylight. At night, in the rain, visibility dropped to nothing. At 2,100 on October 25th, the Japanese attacked. The first assault did not hit Paige's section. It struck 400 yards to the west, against positions held by Company C. The sound of rifle fire and grenades rolled across the ridge. Paige could hear the distinctive crack of Japanese Arisaka rifles, the deeper boom of Marine Springfields and Garens, the ripping sound of machine guns. Tracers arced through the darkness. Red American tracers going one direction. Green Japanese tracers coming back. The firing lasted 45 minutes. Then it stopped. Company C had held. At 2,200, the Japanese probed Paige's sector. Small groups of soldiers moving through the jungle, testing the Marine positions, looking for gaps. Paige's men held their fire. They had orders not to shoot unless they had clear targets. Muzzle flashes would reveal their positions. The Japanese were trying to locate the machine guns. Once they knew where the guns were, they would mass their assault to overwhelm those positions. A Marine in the foxhole 20 yards to Paige's left called out softly, "Movement." 10 yards out, Paige could not see anything. The rain had increased. Visibility was 0. He listened. Nothing. Then a splash. Someone stepping into water. Then another splash. Closer. The Marine fired. The muzzle flash lit up the jungle for a fraction of a second. In that fraction of a second, Paige saw them. Japanese soldiers. Dozens of them. Moving in a line through the kunai grass. They were 15 yards away. The machine guns opened fire. The sound was deafening. 8 guns firing simultaneously. Tracers cut through the darkness in streams of red light. The Japanese soldiers went down. Some fell and did not move. Others dove for cover in the grass. Others kept coming. The Japanese assault rolled forward like a wave. Hundreds of soldiers screaming, "Banzai!" and "Marine, you die!" They came through the gunfire. They stepped over their dead. They kept coming. Paige's gun was firing. His assistant gunner fed the belt. The barrel was heating up. Steam rose from the water jacket. Brass casings piled up beside the gun. The Japanese were 10 yards away. Then 8 yards. Then 5 yards. A Japanese soldier appeared directly in front of Paige's position. Paige could see his face in the muzzle flash. Young. Maybe 20 years old. The soldier was raising a rifle with a fixed bayonet. Paige swung the machine gun and fired. The soldier disappeared. The assault lasted 20 minutes. Then the Japanese pulled back. They disappeared into the jungle as quickly as they had appeared. The firing stopped. Silence returned. Rain continued to fall. Paige checked his position. 2 men wounded. 1 gun jammed from overheating. Ammunition expenditure: 3,000 rounds. 1/3 of their supply gone in 20 minutes. At 2,330, the Japanese attacked again. This assault was larger than the first. Paige estimated 300 soldiers coming up the slope toward his section. They moved in waves. First wave to draw fire. Second wave to close while the Marines reloaded. Third wave to overrun the positions. Japanese tactical doctrine. Paige had read the intelligence reports. He knew what to expect. The machine guns opened fire. The first wave went down. The second wave kept coming. They were inside the defensive perimeter now. Hand to hand fighting on the ridge. Marines with kabar knives and entrenching tools. Japanese with bayonets and swords. Paige's assistant gunner was killed. A Japanese soldier had crawled close enough to throw a grenade. The grenade landed 3 feet from the gun. The assistant gunner threw himself on it. The explosion killed him instantly. Paige survived because the assistant gunner's body absorbed the blast. Paige kept firing. The barrel was glowing red. The water in the jacket was boiling. The gun would burn out soon. He did not care. Japanese soldiers were 3 yards away. If he stopped firing, they would overwhelm the position. He held the trigger down. The gun stuttered. Jammed. He cleared the jam. Fired again. Jammed again. A Japanese officer charged through the smoke and rain. He had a katana raised over his head. He was 2 yards from Paige. Paige drew his .45 caliber pistol and fired 3 times. The officer fell. His sword embedded itself in the sandbags 6 inches from Paige's head. The second assault ended at midnight. The Japanese withdrew again. This time, they left more dead. Paige counted 40 bodies in front of his position alone. The total Japanese losses across the ridge were in the hundreds. Paige's section had been reduced to 21 men. 12 were dead or too wounded to fight. 3 machine guns were destroyed. 5 remained operational. Ammunition was critical. Maybe 4,000 rounds total for all 5 guns. At sustained rate of fire, they had enough ammunition for 10 minutes of fighting. The Japanese would attack again. At 0130, medical corpsmen reached the ridge. They evacuated the wounded who could be moved. They gave morphine to those who could not. Ammunition bearers brought fresh belts from the battalion supply point. Not enough. Never enough. They brought 2,000 rounds. Paige distributed them evenly among the 5 guns. At 0200, Paige walked the line. He checked each position. He spoke to each man. He told them what he knew. The Japanese were massing for another assault. This one would be larger than the first 2. This one would be designed to break through. The men did not complain. They were Marines. They had trained for this. They had joined the Corps, knowing they would fight. What they had not known was what fighting felt like, what dying sounded like, what Japanese soldiers looked like when they emerged from the darkness, screaming and shooting. They knew now, and they were still there, still ready, still Marines. At 0230, Paige returned to his gun. The jungle was quiet. Too quiet. The rain had stopped. The clouds were breaking up. Moonlight filtered through the gaps. For the first time in hours, Paige could see more than a few yards. He could see the slope falling away in front of him. He could see the bodies from the earlier assaults. He could see the edge of the kunai grass 30 yards down the slope. And he could see movement in the grass. The Japanese were forming up. Paige estimated 1,000 soldiers. Maybe more. They were packed into the kunai grass in company formations. He could see officers moving among them, organizing the assault. He could see the flags. Each Japanese company carried a flag. He counted 10 flags. 10 companies. If each company had 150 men, that was 1,500 soldiers preparing to attack 21 Marines with 5 machine guns. Paige grabbed the sound-powered telephone. He called battalion. He reported what he was seeing. Battalion acknowledged. They were sending reinforcements. But the reinforcements would not arrive before the assault began. Paige and his men would have to hold. He did not tell his men about the 1,500 soldiers. He told them the Japanese were coming. He told them to hold their fire until he gave the order. He told them to make every round count. At 0300, the Japanese began their assault. The bugle sounded first. A high, piercing note that cut through the night. Then the screaming started. Banzai! Banzai! Tenno Heika Banzai! Long live the Emperor! The Japanese soldiers rose from the kunai grass and charged up the slope. Paige waited. He watched the wave approaching. 50 yards. 40 yards. 30 yards. Then he opened fire. All 5 guns fired simultaneously. The tracers created solid lines of red light reaching down the slope into the Japanese formation. The first rank of soldiers went down. The second rank stumbled over the bodies. The third rank kept coming. The fourth. The fifth. There was no end to them. The guns were overheating. The water jackets were boiling dry. Paige could smell the metal burning. His gun was firing erratically now. 3 rounds, then a jam. Clear the jam. 5 rounds, then another jam. The barrel was warping from the heat. He needed to change it. He did not have time. A Japanese soldier reached the sandbags to Paige's left. The Marine there was reloading his rifle. The soldier bayoneted him through the chest. Paige swung his machine gun and fired a burst. The soldier fell, but the damage was done. The Marine was dead. The gun at that position was unmanned. Another Japanese soldier appeared on Paige's right. This one had a grenade. Paige drew his pistol and fired. Missed. Fired again. Hit. The soldier fell, but the grenade was already in the air. It landed behind Paige's position and exploded. Shrapnel tore through his left arm. He could not feel the wound. Adrenaline. He kept firing. The gun to his left was still unmanned. Japanese soldiers were pouring through the gap. Paige made a decision. He grabbed his machine gun, the Browning M1917. A one weighed 93 pounds with the tripod, and lifted it. He cradled it in his arms like an enormous rifle. He stepped out of his fighting position and walked toward the gap. No Marine had ever fired a water-cooled machine gun from the hip before. The gun was not designed for it. The weight was too great. The recoil was too powerful. The barrel was too hot. Paige did not care. He fired as he walked. He swung the gun left and right, hosing down the Japanese soldiers coming through the gap. They fell in rows. 5 at a time. 10 at a time. The barrel burned through his left forearm, 3rd-degree burns. He did not stop. His arms were locked. The gun was part of him now. He walked 30 yards along the ridgeline, firing continuously. He reached the unmanned gun position. He stopped. He kept firing. The Japanese assault had focused on the gap. Now, Paige was in the gap. They tried to flank him. He turned and fired. They tried to rush him from the front. He fired. They threw grenades. He kept moving, kept firing. The grenades exploded behind him, beside him, in front of him. Shrapnel hit his legs, his back, his arms. He did not fall. He could not fall. If he fell, the ridge would fall. If the ridge fell, Henderson Field would fall. If Henderson Field fell, the Pacific War might be lost. He was not thinking about the Pacific War. He was not thinking about strategy or logistics or the global implications of this one battle on this one ridge on this one island. He was thinking about the men in the foxholes behind him, the Marines who were counting on him to hold the line, the dead men who had already given their lives to hold this position. He would not let them down. The Browning jammed. The barrel had finally failed. Paige dropped it. He picked up a Springfield rifle from a dead Marine. He fired. Worked the bolt. Fired again. The Japanese were 5 yards away. He fixed the bayonet. They were 3 yards away. He thrust, parried, thrust again. A Japanese sergeant swung a rifle butt at Paige's head. Paige ducked. The blow glanced off his helmet. He thrust his bayonet into the sergeant's stomach. The sergeant went down. Another soldier came. Paige shot him. Another. Shot him too. The rifle was empty. He used it as a club. Swung, connected. A Japanese soldier fell. He found another rifle. Loaded it. Fired. Found another. Loaded. Fired. The sun was coming up. Paige had been fighting for 5 hours. The Japanese assault had finally broken. Not from lack of will. Not from lack of courage. From lack of soldiers. So many Japanese had died trying to take this ridge that the survivors could not continue the attack. They withdrew into the jungle. They left their dead behind. Paige stood on the ridge as the light grew stronger. He was covered in blood. Some of it was his. Most of it was not. He had been hit 11 times during the night. Shrapnel wounds, bayonet cuts, burns. He was still standing. He was the only one still standing. All 33 men in his section were casualties, dead or wounded. Every single one. Paige was the last man fighting, and he had held the ridge. Reinforcements arrived at 0630, a company from the 2nd Battalion, 164th Infantry Regiment, Army troops who had landed on Guadalcanal just 13 days earlier. They came up the ridge, expecting to relieve exhausted Marines. Instead, they found one man standing among the bodies, one sergeant with a rifle in his hands and blood running down his face, one Marine who had refused to die. The Army lieutenant leading the reinforcements looked at the battlefield. He looked at the Japanese bodies piled in front of the Marine positions. He looked at the destroyed machine guns. He looked at Paige. He asked what had happened. Paige did not answer immediately. He was having trouble speaking. His throat was raw from shouting. His ears were ringing from the gunfire. His vision was blurred from exhaustion and blood loss. Finally, he managed 4 words. They kept coming. The lieutenant ordered his men into defensive positions. He called for medics. The corpsman reached Paige and tried to treat his wounds. Paige refused. There were other wounded men who needed attention more than he did. Men who might die without immediate treatment. Paige's wounds were serious, but he was still walking. He could wait. The battalion commander, Lieutenant Colonel Herman Henry Hannekin, arrived at 0800. Hannekin had won the Medal of Honor in Haiti in 1919 for single-handedly killing a rebel leader. He understood combat. He understood courage. He walked the ridgeline. He counted the Japanese dead. He examined the positions. He reconstructed what had happened during the night. When he finished, he found Paige sitting against a tree, finally allowing a corpsman to bandage his arm. Hannekin stood in front of Paige for a long moment without speaking. Then he said, "You held the line, Sergeant. The whole line. You saved this regiment." Paige shook his head. "The men held the line, sir. I just stayed with them." The official count of Japanese dead in front of Paige's section was 950. 950 soldiers killed by 33 Marines with 8 machine guns. Not wounded. Killed. The wounded had been evacuated by their comrades during the night, or had crawled away into the jungle, or had been shot as they lay helpless in front of the American positions. The dead remained where they fell. They covered the slope for 200 yards. In some places, the bodies were stacked 3 deep. Paige's section had fired over 26,000 rounds of ammunition during the night. 300 rounds per man. 10 belts per gun. They had burned out 5 barrels. They had worn 3 guns down to useless scrap. They had fought until there was nothing left to fight with. And then they had fought with bayonets and knives and fists. Of the 33 Marines in Paige's section, 18 were killed in action on October 26th. 13 were wounded, some critically. 2 were physically unharmed, but suffering from combat fatigue so severe they could not function. Mitchell Paige was the only man in the section who was still capable of fighting when the sun came up. The Japanese 2nd Infantry Division did not attack again that day. Or the next day. Or the day after that. The assault on October 25-26 had cost them over 3,500 men killed. The Sendai Division, which had never been defeated in China, had been shattered on the ridges south of Henderson Field. General Maruyama withdrew his surviving forces into the jungle. He would never threaten the airfield again. Guadalcanal would continue for 3 more months. The Japanese would reinforce. The Marines would hold. The Tokyo Express would run. The Cactus Air Force would fly. Men would die in the jungle, on the beaches, in the air. But the crisis was over. Henderson Field would remain in American hands. The first major Allied ground offensive of the Pacific War would succeed. Mitchell Paige did not know any of this on the morning of October 26th. He did not know that his stand had been the critical moment of the entire campaign. He did not know that the Joint Chiefs of Staff in Washington had been discussing the possible evacuation of Guadalcanal just 2 weeks earlier. He did not know that the outcome of the battle for Henderson Field would determine whether Australia remained in the war, whether the Japanese could consolidate their Pacific conquests, whether the United States would be forced into a defensive posture for years to come. He knew only that his men were dead, that he had survived when they had not, that he had done his duty. That was enough. Mitchell Paige was evacuated from Guadalcanal on November 2nd, 1942. His wounds required treatment at a rear area hospital. He spent 3 weeks recovering. Then, he returned to his regiment. He would not leave his Marines. On December 9th, 1942, the 1st Marine Division was finally relieved. They had been on Guadalcanal for 126 days. They had fought the Japanese to a standstill. They had lost 1,598 men killed, 4,709 wounded. They had contracted malaria at a rate approaching 100%. They were exhausted, emaciated, sick, and victorious. The division sailed to Australia for rest and rebuilding. In Melbourne, they received a hero's welcome. The Australians understood what the Marines had done. They understood that Guadalcanal had saved their country from invasion. They opened their homes to the American soldiers. They treated them as liberators. Paige recovered in Australia, his wounds healed, his strength returned. But the memories did not fade. He would wake at night, thinking he heard bugles. He would reach for a rifle that was not there. He would see Japanese soldiers in the shadows of Melbourne streets. On February 1943, Admiral William Halsey presented Mitchell Paige with the Medal of Honor. The ceremony took place in Melbourne. The citation read, "For extraordinary heroism and conspicuous gallantry in action, above and beyond the call of duty, while serving with a company of Marines in combat against enemy Japanese forces in the Solomon Islands on 26 October 1942. When the enemy broke through the line directly in front of his position, Platoon Sergeant Paige, commanding a machine gun section with fearless determination, continued to direct the fire of his gunners until all his men were either killed or wounded. Alone, against the deadly hail of Japanese shells, he then fought with his gun, maintaining his fire until the barrel became too hot to use. Finding another weapon, he continued to hold the line, engaging the enemy with pistol, rifle, and bayonet. Boldly leading a bayonet charge, he personally killed numerous enemy troops and drove the remainder fleeing in confusion. His great personal valor and unyielding devotion to duty were in keeping with the highest traditions of the United States Naval Service. Paige stood at attention while the admiral pinned the medal to his chest. He did not smile. He did not celebrate. He thought about the 18 men who had died on that ridge. He thought about Private First Class Leroy Diamond, who had been 19 years old and engaged to a girl back home in Ohio. He thought about Corporal James Pettit, who had been a father and had shown Paige pictures of his infant daughter. He thought about Gunnery Sergeant Wilbur Johnston, who had been due to rotate home the week after the battle and had died 100 yards from Paige's position. They deserved the medal. He was just the one who survived to receive it. After Melbourne, Paige returned to combat. He could have gone home. Medal of Honor recipients were often rotated stateside for war bond tours and propaganda work. Paige refused. His regiment was going back to the Pacific. He was going with them. The 7th Marines fought at Cape Gloucester in December 1943. New Britain, more jungle, more rain, more Japanese. Paige was now a platoon sergeant with expanded responsibilities. He led men into battle. He brought most of them back. Cape Gloucester was a different kind of fight than Guadalcanal. The Japanese were on the defensive now. The Marines were attacking. But the jungle was the same. The heat was the same. The fear was the same. Paige was wounded again at Cape Gloucester. Shrapnel from a mortar round. Not serious enough for evacuation. He stayed with his men. In September 1944, the 1st Marine Division assaulted Peleliu. It was supposed to be a quick operation, 3 days to secure the island. Instead, it became one of the bloodiest battles of the Pacific War. The Japanese had dug into the island's coral ridges. They had created an interlocking defensive system of tunnels and bunkers. They would not retreat. They would not surrender. They would fight until they died. Peleliu lasted 73 days. The 1st Marine Division suffered 6,526 casualties. Paige fought on the Umerbrogel ridges, the most heavily defended terrain on the island. The fighting was hand-to-hand in some places. Men died within arm's reach of the enemy. The ridges were littered with bodies, American and Japanese together. Paige was wounded again at Peleliu, this time seriously. A Japanese sniper hit him in the chest. The bullet missed his heart by 2 inches. He was evacuated to a hospital ship. He spent 2 months recovering. This time, there was no going back. The war was ending. His body could take no more. Mitchell Paige was commissioned as a second lieutenant on the 1st of November, 1944. He had earned the promotion through combat performance. He was 26 years old and already a legend in the Marine Corps. But he was tired. The war had taken everything from him. His health, his youth, his peace of mind. He would never be the same man who had enlisted in 1936. The war ended on the 2nd of September, 1945. Paige was in San Diego when the Japanese surrendered. He heard the news on the radio. He did not celebrate. He sat alone in his room and thought about the men who would not be coming home. Diamond, Pettit, Johnston, hundreds of others, thousands of others. Men who had died so that this day would come. Paige stayed in the Marine Corps after the war. It was the only life he knew. He had enlisted at 18. The Corps had raised him, trained him, shaped him. He could not imagine being anything else. He was promoted to first lieutenant, then captain. He served in peacetime garrison duty. He trained young Marines. He tried to prepare them for combat that might never come, or that might come tomorrow. Korea exploded in June 1950. Paige did not go to Korea. His wounds had finally caught up with him. The doctors found problems with his lungs, his heart, his joints. The accumulated damage of 3 years of combat in the Pacific. He was medically retired from active duty in 1959 with the rank of colonel. He had served 23 years. He settled in La Quinta, California. The desert climate helped his lungs. The quiet helped his mind. He married. He raised a family. He tried to live a normal life. But the memories would not leave him alone. He would wake at 0300, the hour when the Japanese had launched their final assault. He would hear screaming that existed only in his memory. He would reach for a weapon that was not there. His wife learned to sleep lightly, to wake when he stirred, to talk him back to the present when he was lost in the past. He never talked about October 26th, 1942. Not to his wife. Not to his children. Not to anyone. When people asked about the Medal of Honor, he changed the subject. When veterans organizations invited him to speak, he declined. The events of that night were locked away in a part of his mind he could not access without cost. In 1975, a Marine Corps historian contacted Paige. The historian was writing a comprehensive account of the Guadalcanal campaign. He wanted to interview survivors. He wanted to document what had really happened on those ridges 33 years earlier. Paige agreed to speak with him. The interview lasted 7 hours. Paige talked about the preparation, the positioning of the guns, the first Japanese probes, the first assault, the second assault, the third assault. He talked about his men, their names, their faces, their deaths. When he reached the part about walking with the machine gun, he stopped. He could not continue. Tears were running down his face. He was 57 years old, a retired Marine colonel, a Medal of Honor recipient, and he was crying like a child. The historian waited. Finally, Paige said, "I can still see their faces. Every one of them. The Japanese soldiers. My Marines. They're all there, in my head. They never leave. They never will." He finished the interview. He answered every question. He provided details that had never been recorded anywhere else. He gave the historian everything he needed to write an accurate account of the battle. Then he went home and did not speak about October 26th again for another decade. In 1985, Paige's wife passed away. The loss devastated him. She had been his anchor. She had kept him connected to the present. Without her, he began to drift back into the past. He started writing. Late at night, when he could not sleep, he would sit at his desk and write about Guadalcanal, about his men, about what they had done and what it had cost. The writing was therapy. It was also testimony. He wanted someone to know the truth. He wanted the names of his dead Marines to survive. He wrote for 10 years. The manuscript grew to 500 pages. It covered his entire career, from his enlistment in 1936 to his retirement in 1959. But the heart of the book was October 26th. The machine gun in his arms, the burning in his forearms, the Japanese soldiers falling in waves, the sunrise over the ridge. The book was published in 1995. A Marine named Mitch Paige was 77 years old. The book received limited distribution. Most copies went to Marine Corps libraries and veterans organizations. Paige did not care about sales. He cared about the record. He wanted his men remembered. On the 15th of November, 2003, Mitchell Paige died in Palm Desert, California. He was 85 years old. He had outlived almost everyone who had fought beside him on Guadalcanal. He had outlived his wife, his closest friends, his era. The Marine Corps buried him with full military honors. The ceremony was held at Riverside National Cemetery. A bugler played taps. A rifle squad fired 3 volleys. The flag was folded and presented to his children. His obituary appeared in newspapers across the country. The headlines focused on the Medal of Honor, on the machine gun, on the 950 Japanese soldiers. These were the facts that could be summarized in a paragraph. These were the things that made him remarkable. But the obituaries did not capture what Paige himself considered most important: the names of his dead, the obligation he felt to honor their sacrifice, the weight of survival. He had told an interviewer once, near the end of his life, what he wanted people to understand about October 26th. 1942. Don't remember me, he said. Remember them. Leroy Diamond, James Pettit, Wilbur Johnston. All of them. They're the heroes. I'm just the one who lived. Henderson Field still exists. It is now called Honiara International Airport. It serves the capital of the Solomon Islands. Commercial jets land where Wildcats and Dauntlesses once took off to attack Japanese shipping. Tourists pass through without knowing that the runway they are using was the most important piece of real estate in the Pacific in 1942. The ridges south of the airfield are overgrown now. The jungle has reclaimed the battlefields. The fighting positions have collapsed. The shell craters have filled in. The bones of the dead have been collected and interred in proper cemeteries, American and Japanese alike. But the terrain remains: the slopes where Paige positioned his guns, the kunai grass where the Sendai Division formed up for their assaults, the military crest where 33 Marines held against 1,500 Japanese soldiers through 5 hours of darkness. If you stand on that ridge today, you can still see what Paige saw: the slope falling away, the jungle pressing close, the claustrophobic geography of combat in the Solomons. You can imagine what it was like: the rain, the darkness, the screaming, the gunfire. You cannot imagine what it felt like. No one can. Not unless they were there. Not unless they held a 93-pound machine gun in their arms and walked into the Japanese assault and refused to die when everyone around them was dying. Mitchell Paige did not talk about what it felt like. He could not. Some experiences are beyond language. They exist in a place that words cannot reach. What he could do, and what he did, was honor the men who did not survive. For 61 years after October 26, 1942, he carried their names with him. He thought about them every day. He mourned them. He tried to live in a way that would justify his survival. On the morning after the battle, when the Army lieutenant asked what had happened, Paige said, "They kept coming. They kept coming." And he kept fighting. Until there was no one left to fight. Until the sun came up. Until his men were avenged and the ridge was held and the war could continue toward its eventual end. That is what Medal of Honor recipients do. They keep fighting when others would stop. They accept death and fight anyway. They hold the line when the line is breaking. They become more than human for a few terrible hours. And then they spend the rest of their lives trying to become human again. Mitchell Paige never fully succeeded. The war stayed with him. The faces stayed with him. The sound of Japanese bugles at 0300 stayed with him. He was haunted by what he had done and what he had seen and what he had survived. But he did his duty. He honored his dead. He lived the rest of his life in a way that would have made them proud. And on October 26th, 1942, he held the ridge. If this story moved you, if Mitchell Paige's sacrifice and courage meant something to you, hit that like button. Every like tells the algorithm to show this story to more people. Every like helps ensure that Mitchell Paige and the 18 Marines who died on that ridge are not forgotten. Subscribe if you haven't already. Turn on notifications. We're telling the stories of heroes who have been lost to history. Men like Paige, men like Leroy Diamond, and James Pettit and Wilbur Johnston. Men who gave everything so that we could live in freedom. Drop a comment below. Tell us where you're watching from. Tell us if you've heard of Mitchell Paige before. Tell us if someone in your family served in the Pacific. We want to hear from you. We want to know that these stories matter. Thank you for watching. Thank you for remembering. Thank you for being part of the community that keeps these memories alive. Semper Fidelis.